Interim Joint Committee on Appropriations and Revenue, meeting number 1, Wednesday, June the 5th at 1 o'clock p.m. and we are in Annex Room 149. And if you will, please call the roll.
Senator Boswell. Senator Deneen.
Here.
Senator Douglas. Present. Senator Funky Fromeyer. Present. Senator Given. Senator Mays Bledsoe. Senator Neal.
Present.
Senator Nemus. Senator Webb. Representative Banta. Representative Bentley. Representative Bowling.
Here.
Representative Bray.
Present.
Representative Brown.
Here.
Representative Dietz.
Here.
Representative Dossett.
Present.
Representative Flannery.
Here.
Representative Fleming. Representative Frazier Gordon. Representative Freeland. Representative Fugit.
Here.
Representative Gentry. Representative Hart.
Here.
Representative Johnson.
Here.
Representative McCool.
Here.
Representative McPherson.
Here.
Representative Palumbo.
Here.
Representative Raymond. Representative Riley. Representative Stevenson.
Here.
Representative Upchurch.
Here.
Co-Chair McDaniel.
Here.
Co-Chair Petrie.
Here. We have quorum duly constituted to conduct business as we are situated. And before we begin, I do want to say thanks to Logan Schaaf, who's here helping us out on loan, and I do appreciate that as we're filling a position. And we also have Jennifer Troth, or Troth. Where are we at? Is it Troth? Troth, Jennifer Troth. And if you'll stand up for everybody, because you are now with us as a grad fellow, correct? Doing a bang-up job already. I know you are. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you. And if I'm looking at this right, Jennifer's a graduate of WKU, BA in English, concentration professional writing, and currently attending U of L Brandeis School of Law. Congratulations, condolences, do well. All right, and then just really quickly for today, as everyone should have looked at the agenda, no big hot topics on, I hope, but trying to do a review continuation from what we had in some BR subcommittees this morning, going, okay, the 24 session, let's kind of a little cool down period since that ended. Where were we? Where are we at? What's coming up? Appropriations wise as well as revenue wise, and then some historical context on where we at in comparison to some earlier years. And so we've had some really good assistance on putting together some information, and this does somewhat coordinate with earlier information presented at BR subcommittees. But we have on first for today, History and Trends of General Fund Appropriations, Jenny Bannister, Deputy Director for Budget Review, Office of Budget Review, Seth Dawson, Assistant Budget Director, and I think if y'all will come on up. And if you will simply do the following for me. Introduce yourselves for the record after those green lights are really green and the microphones are close enough to you, and then start when you're ready.
Okay, great. I'm Jenny Bannister. I'm the Deputy Director for Budget Review.
Seth Dawson, Assistant Budget Director.
All right, we're going to talk today about the history and trend of general fund appropriations. Then we'll kind of go into some education overviews and some Medicaid overviews, just high level on all of that. So general fund appropriations, typically you'll see the growth in general fund appropriations trend pretty much with general fund revenues and those estimates that we receive. You'll see that later when Jennifer Hayes discusses the revenues. With a few exceptions, in fiscal year 21, the General Assembly, as we all remember, was extremely cautious with the appropriations due to the public health emergency. So we kind of went through an exercise there of responsibility, I would call that, and we did a one-year budget. And there were many items that had previously been contemplated throughout that session, January through February, and in that time of caution, some of those items were removed from the one-year budget and then subsequently added to the fiscal year 22 because we actually did withstand the pressures of that public health emergency really well. And Kentucky experienced revenue growth of approximately 11% in fiscal year 21 and 14.5% 5% in fiscal year 22. So as a result, significant investments were made in 22 in several areas, mainly the disaster recovery, because we had to end up paying for the tornadoes in 21 and the flooding in 22. There were significant investments in teachers' retirement system, approximately $413 million, $452 million in economic development incentives, and $292 million was invested in Kentucky Department of Education. This is a slide that shows you the history of the Budget Reserve Trust Fund balances from 2011 to present. I kind of went with 2011 on the history here because you could see we started out with absolutely nothing. Those were bleak times for those of us who were here then. In fiscal year 2019, the Budget Reserve Trust Fund balance was $129.1 million, and that represented about 1.1% of appropriations for that year. By fiscal year 22, the balance of $1.48 billion is nearly 11% of appropriations. And then in 23, that increased to 15.7% of our appropriations, and in 24, it more than doubled to 37% of our appropriations. It is important to note that the projected and budgeted balances for fiscal years 24, 25, and 26 do take into account the expenditures from House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 91 from the 24 session. On this next slide, I've kind of grouped together those expenditures. About $3.1 billion was spent from the Budget Reserve Trust Fund. These are one-time investments that are made. You can see about 24% of that went to roads and highways. The majority of that was for I-69 and the Mountain Parkway expansion. About 14% went for economic development initiatives. About 12% went for water and sewer projects across the state. Those were state and local water and sewer projects. Post-secondary education initiatives, hospital treatment centers, state retirement plans. $230 million was spent for paying down the unfunded liability of those plans. And then the House Bill 9, can't remember which session that was, the grant program, GRANT program, $200 million was invested in that. And then just for your reference, that other category, it is still quite large, but there were many, many things that we funded in here. And so some of the other things I wanted to take out of that was the other category includes substance use disorder programming, school construction and renovations for schools, fire and emergency services, state and local tourism, affordable housing programs, and investments in our local governments.
If you don't mind, I want to make sure that I'm clear with the preceding, looks like slide 3, I hope. On the Reserve Trust Fund balances, again, that's with House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 91 expenditures.
Yes.
One-time expenditures being calculated in, so you'll see
Yes.
that jump to 5.2 plus billion, and then over the 2-year spending plan with a little bit in current year, you'll see that draw down in 25 and 26, and on current numbers, that would be the expected balance if everything goes perfectly.
Yes,
Okay.
and that was it was approximately $505 million was spent from fiscal year 24, $1.5 billion in 25, and then $1.05 billion in 26.
And then that next chart on page 4, House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 91, the pie chart, that $3.1 plus billion is a comprehensive summary for the current as well as FY 25 and 26 expenditures out of House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 91.
Yes, sir.
It's 2-year spending over 2.5 year.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Just making sure.
All right, now we'll move into K through 12 education, and I do want to note that our analysts for K through 12 education are Liz Columbia and David Talley, and they are with us if there are any hard questions. Okay, so the first slide just kind of shows where we are with K through 12 appropriations in the general fund. For fiscal year 25, it's a total of $5.7 billion. SEEK makes up approximately 38% of that. The nickels, as you all know, make up 4.6%. The SEEK employer match, that's the statutory amount that we pay in retirement for certified staff for KDE. Per pupil transportation, KDE admin and programs is 9%, and that's operations, state grants, and career and tech. The health and life insurance portion is almost 17%, and that's for all district employees. And then we have school construction with SFCC at 2.1%, and then the TRS, this is the amount that's paid above the statutorily required of 14.9%, $846 million in fiscal year 25.
Does the 846 for TRS include the statutory as well as the above, or just the above?
No, sir, it's just the above. The statutory portion is that SEEK employer match of $458 million. Did I say that right? Yay! All right, fiscal year 26, this is basically the same format. Everything is around the same percentages. You can see TRS does increase slightly, goes over $1 billion for the above the statutorily required amount, and the total amount that we're spending is $6.1 billion.
I want to point out two things on this which were of topics of conversation. TRS, you can see those contributions going up significantly. And that's not something that on projections that I've received will plateau anytime soon. So that will be an ongoing concern, as well as this particular session, there was a lot of note made about the health and life insurance section on behalf of payments have increased considerably in each of those 2 years. And the percentages as well as the absolute numbers have gone up and look like they're going to continue, and we'll attempting to start to address those issues, but not sure where we're going to end out. Those two things are on the incline pretty significantly.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So this is a bit of a continuation on how we did things this morning in some of the budget review subcommittees. But for K through 12, the Department of Education is divided into 3 appropriation units, the first of which is the Operations and Support Services Unit. The funding here is approximately $550 million in each fiscal year with about 200 employees. This is primarily the administrative division of KDE and their operations division. It includes the Commissioner's Office and the Board of Education, the Office of Finance and Operations, the Office of Education Technology, and the Office of Legal, Legislative, and Communication Services. Sorry. The next slide, we go to the Learning and Results Services Appropriation Unit. The appropriations here in fiscal year 25 are about $2.8 billion. And in fiscal year 26, it's about $2.17 billion. The loss of federal funds there from $1.4 billion down to $619 was from pandemic funding that we're no longer going to receive. Learning and Results Services is made up of the state schools branch, so that's the Kentucky School for the Blind and Kentucky School for the Deaf, the Career and Tech Education, Assessment and Accountability, Continuous Improvement and Support, Office of Teaching and Learning, which is where most of the LARS list programs are, and this is where the health and life insurance for district staff on behalf payments are made. The next slide is the Support Education Excellence in Kentucky, otherwise known as SEEK Appropriation Unit. SEEK is funded at $3.26 billion in fiscal year 25 and $3.36 billion in fiscal year 26. And this includes the base SEEK, which is the formula for funding student attendance, demographics, transportation costs, and assessed property valuation. Tier 1, it's an additional 17.5% of base SEEK for districts with sufficient local tax rates. Nickel funding, which is facility funding based on local tax levies devoted to capital costs. Vocational education and transportation reimbursements. pro rata reimbursements to local districts for nationally board certified teachers and certified audiologists and speech language pathologists, and then employer contribution for teacher pensions. These are the on behalf payments. This slide compares the SEEK per pupil guarantee plus the fringe that is paid on behalf for employees, and compares that to the CPI adjusted amounts. The state pays on behalf on districts to get a better picture of the total per pupil spending adjusted for inflation. The growth in 2006 through 2016 was due to rising health insurance premiums. Larger growth in 2017 to present is increased ARC payments to TRS. So just a sampling of that ADEC above the statutory requirement that Chair Petrie was speaking of earlier. In fiscal year 17, the state paid approximately $500 million over the ADEC, and in fiscal year 26, it's $948 million over the ADEC, so it's almost doubled. Average daily attendance, this is a historical showing of how the ADA has grown or reduced. It's important to note that in the years with the asterisks, the ADA was frozen or adjusted due to the pandemic and related provisions. In fiscal year 24, we resumed the use of actuals. And then also important to note, in fiscal year 22, part of that increase, that was the first year that kindergarten students were counted in full. They used to be previously counted as half.
And I know there's no perfect way of describing this, but we are on a downward trajectory of growth, which is an inverse way of saying we're on a decline.
Yes.
Okay. And have been for a couple of 3 years, and maybe to the tune of 25,000 plus out of the 600,000 or so, which would be around a 4 to 5% decrease in the last 2 or 3 years is what it looks like. Am I close on that?
Yeah, their projected ADA is down to about, their projected ADA for 2025 is down to about 585,000 from, just 610,000 students 4 years or 2 years ago. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Next slide, we're going to go to Tier 1 funding. The 2024 budget bill, districts can get up to 17.5% of their base funding, including add-ons and unprorated transportation, with sufficient local taxes. The statutory amount for that is a 15% threshold, so that was increased. Tier 1 funding is equalized by the state, the local portion based on per pupil property assessment as a percentage of 150% of the statewide average. And then districts with average assessments above that number receive no state funds. There was approximately $235 million for equalization in fiscal year 25 in the budget, and $224 million in fiscal year 26. The different types of facility funding that we have for schools is first the SEEK capital outlay, $100 per student of the average daily attendance is reserved for capital outlay. Recent budgets have allowed schools to have flexibility to use those funds for operations if they needed. Nickels, which are 5-cent equivalent, equalized by the state at 150% of the statewide average per pupil assessment. Not all districts receive funding from the state. There were 8 property-rich districts in fiscal year 24 that didn't receive that. And the only nickel that is currently available now is the recallable nickel. And then SFCC, there are offers of assistance. $40 million was authorized in the 24-26 biennium, and that's based on unmet local need. Those offers can be escrowed for up to 8 years total, which is over 3 biennia. And then there could be gap funding, additional gap funding that's authorized by the General Assembly. That has happened before. And then the Emergency and Targeted Investment Fund the SFCC can actually appropriate funds from that if there's funds in that available. And then we'll switch gears again. Now we're going to Medicaid benefits. And Miriam Fordham and Kevin Newton are our analysts, and they are also available for really hard questions. This first slide, it was a little difficult.
Just let you know, you're getting some disagreement from staff on the front line back there about whether they're available or not.
They know they are. So I was trying to figure out the best way to show Medicaid appropriations, and I hope that this graph explains what I was trying to get at. But the largest bar by far in any of these clusters is the federal funds. And the second largest is going to be your general funds. That's the darker blue. And then the sort of teal color is the restricted funds. So just to let you know, for fiscal year 12 and fiscal year 13, that was kind of our low point on the federal fund. As a percentage of total appropriations for Medicaid, federal funds were about 70% of that. And in fiscal year 22, that increased the high point for all of these. The federal funds were about 83% of the total appropriation. Important to note here on this, the jump in appropriations from fiscal year 14 to fiscal year 15 was due to the ACA expansion. It began in half of the fiscal year, January of 2014, which was half of fiscal year 14. And then the jump from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 21 was the public health emergency. And that began in January of 2020 and ended in May of 2023. So those are considerable increases in our appropriations.
And if I may, on this, you've got two big topics that you're covering, and that's K-12 and Medicaid. We've had other addressing of other subject matters earlier this morning, but these two, as far as general fund implication, are our two biggest.
Yes, sir.
So K-12 would lead that on general fund implication. The second behind that would be Medicaid, general fund. So when you look at this particular slide and you see how much federal money is involved, and when you put it relative comparison, you go, wow, that's not a great lot of general fund in comparison. But when you note that in 23 we were right at the $2 billion mark, and now we should be at the 3 or a little above, and that's projected to continue to increase. One, we have to wonder why it's continued on that trajectory. That's a larger investigation, but these are the two biggest general fund. And when you look at with federal funds involved in K-12 and federal funds involved in Medicaid and federal funds involved everywhere else, these are still our two biggest items by far, correct?
Yes.
All right. So when we see that little bit of general fund, that little bit of general fund is actually a very large dollar figure compared to our budget, even though in comparison to the federal inputs, it's relatively small.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So on to the next slide. This details the average monthly cost per eligible. Again, in the ACA expansion began in January of 2014, and the COVID crisis began in January of 2020. And then the last slide.
There's a question on this one, I believe, of the dollar figures assigned for the Medicaid benefits, average monthly cost per eligible. Taking FY23, the dollar figure 808 per eligible, is that consideration of all fund sources, federal and state, restricted general fund, or is it limited to something?
No, it's all fund sources.
So
yes.
Total sum of money going into that system for this purpose divided by eligibles, and that would be 808 for
Yes.
that year. Thank you.
Yes. And then the last slide I have for you, it details the amount or the number of eligibles or projected eligibles. And again, you'll see a jump for the ACA expansion in 2014 and another jump for the public health emergency in fiscal year from 20 to 21. Just a couple of things to note. Redeterminations were prohibited during the public health emergency, so enrollment was not able to decline. But Kentucky's now able to perform those redeterminations, so caseloads may decrease. There was a little bit budgeted for that. And then the match rates for the fiscal biennium 24-26, traditional Medicaid is still around a 70-30. Match expansion is around 90-10. And then the K-CHIP is about 80-20, just in rough percentages.
And then as far as volume served, I think traditional Medicaid is still somewhere between 940,000 or 60,000, somewhere in that ballpark, with the ACA expansion being around 646,000. Am I close?
Traditional Medicaid is about 50% of the total number of eligibles, and the expansion is about 32 to 33%.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that's all I have for you.
Any hard-hitting questions from anyone that goes to the first row behind the presenters? Do not see any. Thank y'all very much. Thank you, and thank everybody that helped prepare. Thank you very much. Next up, we have History and Trends of Revenue. Jennifer Hayes, who is used to sitting up here, Committee Staff Administrator, Appropriations and Revenue Committee, is going to give us some information about revenue measures and history and trends of revenue in whatever order she desires to proceed in. And when you're ready, make sure you introduce yourself for the record and do all the normals about microphones and everything else.
So, Jennifer Hayes, Committee Staff Administrator, Appropriations and Revenue Committee. History and Trends in Revenue. Since we had History and Trends in General Fund Appropriations, I thought this should just follow right along.
Very good.
So the chair requested that staff look at several different things, general fund receipts and associated growth rates with those, road fund receipts and those growth rates for a 20-year period of time. Differences between the actual collections and the CFG estimates, consensus forecasting group estimates. We've also included a slide that I'll just buzz right over because you heard it from Jenny Bannister, the year-end balances in the Budget Reserve Trust Fund, and then finally the Unemployment Trust Fund. So, starting with General Fund, and there's a lot going on here, so let's take a little bit to dive into this slide. We began with fiscal year 2003-2004 over on the left-hand side of the graph. And then if you can see, and I don't know how visible that is from that row, but the table below contains the actual dollar amounts for the line items in the graph above it. So individual income tax is the orange bar, and sales and use tax is the gray bar, or the orange line and the gray line, excuse me. And then all other general fund receipts are included in that gold line. The top line, the blue line at the top, is total general fund receipts. So you see that two major taxes are outlined here, individual income tax and sales and use tax. And those two taxes represent approximately 70% of all general fund receipts for the entire period that we're looking at, that entire 20-year period. We began over in 2004 on the left side with slightly less than $7 billion in general fund receipts, and end over on the right side with approximately $15 billion. Notice that in 2004 there are categories for individual, sales, and other. They're pretty much evenly spaced out, those three lines at the bottom when you began. You see the lines almost converge on top of each other in 2006 and 2007. They converge, and then they spread back out, they diverge after that. And so many of the provisions during that time of convergence, many of the provisions from Governor Fletcher's tax modernization plan were enacted. That began in 2005. And one major change was in Kentucky's methodology of taxing pass-through entities. Individual income tax receipts were decreased, while corporation income tax receipts increased for a 2-year period. And that was because we began the taxation of pass-through entities at the entity level. Now, in 2007, that was reversed. That provision was reversed primarily at the request of tax preparers because the burden of compliance and filing individual income tax returns particularly, there was an increased burden with that because of the differences between state and federal returns. And so in 2007, that was reversed, and then you see the lines go back to a normal, what we consider to be a normal rate there. Notice in 2009 and 2010, receipts were impacted by the effects of the Great Recession. Other states began seeing those impacts as early as 2007, many more in 2008. It really didn't show up in our receipts until 2009. Kentucky is generally slow to enter and then slow to recover from any recessionary times. And then as you follow the blue line on out, you see that in 2018 we begin to see an impact from two different occurrences. The U.S. Supreme Court issued its decision in the Wayfair case related to sales tax for remote sellers and marketplace facilitators. And we have the first significant tax reform measures enacted since 2005, also at that same point in time. Any historical chart would be incomplete without the mention of COVID. You heard it in Jenny's presentation. You see it again here in mine. You'll see it over and over in mine. Growth accelerated in 2021 and 2022 because of the federal stimulus, mostly in part due to the federal stimulus receipts that were coming into the state. And then finally, notice back to the orange line, the individual income, the orange line, the individual income tax line, the drop from $6 billion to $5.8 billion from 22 to 23. That is one half of the first year of impact that's being reflected in receipts from the individual income tax rate reduction. Recall that individual income tax rates were reduced from 5 to 4.5% for 23, then again 4% in 24. There will not be a reduction for the calendar year 25, and then in September of this year we will get a report from the state budget director as they calculate that formula and report on a reduction, whether or not a reduction will be for calendar year 26. So a lot of information there. Any questions? If not, I'll just move on. So this slide is an alternative way to look at the data that we just talked about. Instead of actual dollar amounts, we're looking at the growth rate of general fund, and that's the percentage change from one year to the next. So from 2004 through 2019, general fund growth rate averaged 3.4%. You might ask, well, why didn't you go ahead and do that through all the blue bars? Well, those COVID years of 21 and 22 skew that percentage. And so if you were to include those additional bars, the average growth rate would jump to 4.2%. So the 3.4 is more in line with what we've seen historically over a long period of time. In the Great Recession, 2009, 2010, notice the negative bars. We had negative receipts in those years, and which means a decline, not a growth, like you said before. And notice even in 2020, we had just 1.5% growth because of the pandemic. And then at the end, the yellow bars at the end are the forecasted growth issued by the Consensus Forecasting Group in December, just prior to the 2024 regular session. So you might be wondering why 0% growth there in 25. And so the Consensus Forecasting Group is the body that estimates those receipts, and they have forecasted those growth rates for us. Receipts are flat. That 0% means we will get probably, they estimate that we will get in 25 the same amount of revenue that we will receive in 24. And so why flat? Why not continuing to grow? And it's based upon a lot of different factors considered by the CFG. But one primary factor is this a national market that they evaluate, and information on the national level that then is used to make the Kentucky estimates. And so nationally, the economists believe that there will be a flat, all across the nation, flat. And so that just rolls into Kentucky's estimate as well. And remember also, while I said that, we had 1/2 of 1 year of individual income tax rates, we will continue to see individual income tax reduce, probably, unless wage growth or additional employees overcome that. We will see a continuing downward trend in individual income tax during those years. Since we're talking about the Consensus Forecasting Group, let's look at this slide, which shows the dollar value of the difference between general fund collections and the final CFG estimate. And so a blue bar means that revenue receipts were actually greater than the CFG estimate. A red bar means that receipts were less than the CFG estimate. In most years, the difference between the two is less than $200 million. The two post-pandemic years, 2021 and 2022, are the exception, of course, to that general statement. And in these 2 years, Kentucky was not alone in under-forecasting tax receipts. Pretty much the timing of the CFG estimating process, and then when those federal funds started to come into Kentucky, being spent or used by individuals here and businesses, it just didn't line up so that could be considered within the CFG estimate. This slide shows similar information, but instead of dollar amounts, it's the percentage difference between the CFG estimate, actual revenues, and the CFG estimate. The black line shows that absolute average absolute percent difference over the entire time period. If you take out the 2 years, that percentage drops to just slightly over 1%, so a 0.8% difference there. And so if you were to say generally the CFG misses the estimate by 1%, most economists out there in the world would say that's great. That's a fantastic track record for the CFG. Now, I'm not an economist, and I've tried to convince John Runker, the LRC chief economist, that my minor in economics, along with my other 2 degrees from UK, are sufficient to be an economist, but he keeps telling me no. So I'll stick over here into my accountant lane, but I can tell you about the bottom line, and that bottom line is on a $15 billion base, if the CFG estimate is off roughly by 1%, then that's $150 million that we're going to be off. So it's not large when you look at it that way. If there's no questions, I'll move on to the road fund. Just like the general fund, we have pretty much the same slides. 2 major taxes, once again, in the road fund. The orange line is motor fuels taxes. The gray line is motor vehicle usage taxes. Some people say that's the sales tax on cars. The statute calls it motor vehicle usage, so just that's the words I'll use. And these two taxes represent over 80% of general fund, road fund receipts. The gold line in the bar, the graph, is all other receipts, and of course the blue line at the top are the total receipts for the road fund. Once again, notice 2009, 2010, we see the similar impact from the Great Recession. Motor vehicle usage declined as people were not buying or trading cars during the recession. Motor fuel statutes back in 2010. If you look at the orange line, you see motor fuels start to rise pretty significantly. The statutes back in 2010 allowed for a quarterly evaluation of the average wholesale price. Now remember that motor fuels is 9% of the average wholesale price. And so what revenue does is they survey the state for average wholesale price, and they calculate the average wholesale price that is used to determine motor fuels tax. So in July 2009, the beginning of that fiscal year, 2010, the average wholesale price was set at 1.864. By the end of that fiscal year is 2.312. So 9% of that, you can see each quarter motor fuels taxes were increasing in that four-quarter period. And they increased from 16.1 cents per gallon to 19.2 cents per gallon. That's that 9% calculation. That process continued until a statutory change was made on July 1st, 2015, which would be for the fiscal year 2016. Average wholesale price was statutorily set at the floor, which then lowered the tax. And now, today, the average wholesale price is evaluated on an annual basis rather than on a quarterly basis. And tax changes occur at the beginning of a fiscal year rather than quarterly. Look also at the motor vehicle usage line, that gray line from 20 to 21. People started buying cars again after the pandemic had kind of cooled down and we started getting out again. And the price for used cars increased as more people were looking for a good deal. So the demand for used cars was higher, and so we see prices shooting up. Now, for your information, it's not reflected on the chart, but just for your information, as we look forward to July 1 of 2024, you in transportation yesterday heard this, but there will be a decrease to the average wholesale price for motor fuels tax purposes. The average wholesale price will be reduced to $2.38, which means a reduction in motor fuels tax to 21.4 cents per gallon. It's currently 23.7 cents. So that's just for your information. Good news at the pump, hopefully. Similar information to the general fund slides related to road fund here. We see the growth rates. Once again, we calculate the average growth rate from 2004 to 2019, and that is 2.2%. The COVID periods have not been included here. You see the same type of estimates done by the CFG with actually a reduction in 2025 to road fund receipts, and not a growth, a reduction in those receipts. And that is primarily related to the decline in motor fuels that we talked about, that CFG took into consideration when they were making those estimates. The red bars are exactly where you would anticipate the recessionary time and COVID periods. Here we have the difference of actual receipts and the CFG estimate related to the road fund. With the exception of 1 year, 2011, the CFG estimate was less than $100 million different than actual collections. And once again, the absolute values there in percentage terms. This small forecasting error would mean that on a $1.7 billion base, the CFG estimate was off by roughly $39 million. So low error. This is the budget reserve trust fund. I show it in line graph. You saw it in bar graph in Jenny's presentation. So we'll just buzz right on through that. And my final slide on this topic is the unemployment trust fund. This graph is really showing two things. The blue line is the balance in the trust fund account as of the end of a calendar year. So remember, calendar year, not fiscal year basis here. And the red bars are the loan balances at that point in time. So it's a snapshot. So you can see in 2009, the trust fund balance was right at about $10 million, but we had an outstanding loan balance of $577 million with federal government. And you see those loan balances and low trust fund balances continue 2009 through 2014. Then you see the rebound that occurred once that recessionary time was over with, until we get to COVID, and then once again an emptying of the trust fund and a loan again from the feds for that 1 year period. That's all of the slides here for revenue.
Very good. While you're switching over, I just want to point out the unemployment trust fund kind of stands out oddly in this set of slides, but the reason I asked for it to be included is we look at CFG estimates of what might be coming in. We can look at the historicals, we see what's being projected, and that's a pretty good projection methodology that's applied, as Ms. Hayes has referenced. So we've got an idea what's coming in, road fund, general fund, and another prong of what we're looking at is there will always be an up and down in economies. And the up we deal with, the down you have to plan for. And so we have no existing balance owed on the unemployment trust fund. We're a little over, I think, at this point, but on the 23 numbers, $827 million. Target roughly right now is about 1.2, 1.25 billion in my mind and some others. So we will let that, hopefully that will continue to grow. And the reason being is this: when we go into a downturn, what do we want to make sure? We want to make sure that people have got unemployment funds that can go out. We're not having to borrow money and pay back money. This puts us in a very healthy aspect of we have a good budget reserve trust fund balance for what ifs, but we also have as a frontline defense an unemployment insurance trust fund that is more solid than it ever has been at this point. So that we can continue to make sure that unemployment payments go out without interruption, without incurring debt to make sure that it moves forward. So that's another piece that we look at consistently, and I appreciate you putting in that. And you've got your next setup, is that right?
Right.
Thank you.
So the second ask was for just an overview of what happened during the 24 regular session related to revenue items. And so there were 225 bills, total bills and resolutions that were that became law during the session. 51 of those 225 bills impacted revenue, either plus or minus, or impacted the operations of this committee. And the gentleman operating the KET cameras when I came in said, "Oh, you're not going to go through that whole book, but this binder contains those 51 bills. So this is, thank you. This is what you all did for us in the A&R committee staff." With all these bills, though, there was a very small impact. And since we've just talked about history and trends, I thought I would look back to see what bills we tracked in 23 and 22, past two legislative sessions. So in 23, there were 30 bills at the end that we started tracking. 22, there were 42 bills. So you all did exceedingly well this year with 51 bills.
We're trying to follow instructions.
So this is just a breakdown of those 51 bills you see. There are new fines, there are programmatic funds that were created, there are new reports coming to the committee, changes in fees, local taxes and processes. We also track those in our committee, and state tax processes were changed a little bit in 4 bills. But what I'm really here to talk about are House Bill 8 and House Bill 122, which are the two, what we generally call revenue measure bills. And so we'll begin with general fund and the sales and use tax provisions. There was a new economic development program that was created for data centers. And for qualified data centers, a sales tax exemption is available for infrastructure development of the site for the center, data center, and then for the data center equipment once the building gets built, the equipment that goes inside of that building. There is currently a $6,000 de minimis threshold for the requirement to file and collect and remit sales and use tax for certain services, the expanded services that we have put in since 2018. Beginning January 1, 2025, that threshold is increased to $12,000. And finally, there was an exemption in House Bill 8 for the sales tax on currency and bullion.
I'm going to hit that one real quick. It's got a parenthetical of vetoed. There was reported, and I'm not going to get into an argument over it. I'm just going to try to relate it so everybody's got a better field grab of it. There was a purported veto. It's a question of whether it was an appropriate veto or a legal veto. The Secretary of State registered the bill as passed by the General Assembly. I believe there was a ruling most recently from the Attorney General that the bill stands. We will see if there's any legal action taken over that to more settle or resolve any issues outstanding, but that's what the current status is. Sorry, go ahead, thank you.
Okay. Staying in the general fund, we're going to turn to inheritance tax. There was an exemption for a general power of appointment created to align Kentucky's inheritance tax with a similar treatment for federal purposes, federal estate tax purposes. So an example here, you might not understand that word, those wordings, general power of appointment. An example would include if in Kentucky my will had a provision that the education or the health or some provision be made for my great-grandchild, if that were in my will, then that is a power of appointment. That's a general power of appointment. And that Class B beneficiary, my great-grandchild, would not now owe the tax, the inheritance tax, on that general power of appointment. Many times throughout this part of the presentation, you'll hear me say, this provision was extended. That's what several of items within the revenue measures bills accomplished. So the coal severance tax on exported coal was extended for 2 more years. And the calculation of modified new revenues for income tax purposes related to tax increment financing calculations was also extended for 2 years. Moving on to the car rental and rideshare tax, there will be an allowance for bad debt deductions for an uncollectible account. This could occur if a customer pulls up or accepts a rental or rideshare service, pays with a credit card, but then disputes that credit card charge. The money would never actually be returned to the car rental or ride-sharing company. And so that would be considered a bad debt for income tax purposes, would be removed from their accounting records, and then they could then take a deduction for the tax paid on those services. Litigation in the property tax area created the need for a clarification of the taxation of pipelines, mains, conduits, several items there. And for 2 years, this type of property will be taxed as real property instead of tangible personal property. For income tax purposes now, there is a new tax credit for qualified broadband investments, and that will be allowed for 4 taxable years. Related to this credit, a taxpayer could take a credit equal to 50% of the sales tax paid on qualified broadband investment. And that total credit for all taxpayers is limited to $5 million each year. Taxpayers filing a combined income tax return based on the unitary business concept would have been allowed in 24 to begin deducting what is called a deferred tax deduction on the unitary return, that combined report. That deduction was delayed for 2 years to January 1, 2026. The reference date to the Internal Revenue Code was updated. This has become an annual process in the statute to update because Congress hasn't been doing a lot, making a lot of changes in the most recent years at the federal level. But staff will be closely monitoring the congressional actions during the summer and into next year, as many of the provisions from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 are set to expire in 2025. So if Congress allows these provisions to expire, the General Assembly may want to decide that they do not want to conform it to continue to allowing those tax benefits that are expiring. Or they may decide, you may decide to conform and be same as federal. So that's a decision that you will be able to make based on congressional action. And then the last item here is the current exclusion of income earned by disaster response employees and disaster response businesses is extended for 2 more years. These are individuals and businesses that come into Kentucky from another state to help during disasters that are occurring. Let's move on now to the road fund. Beginning January 1, 2025, the EV ownership fee will only apply to vehicles with a plug-in charging capacity. That basic hybrid vehicle that does not plug in will be exempt from the fee. So that fee was applicable to hybrids for only 1 year, 2024. The definition of electric vehicle power dealer was amended to include only those charging stations with a capacity of 20 kilowatts or more. And that application goes back to January 1, 2024 when the tax was implemented, so you could see some reduction to that receipt account. But those receipts through April of 2024 were just less than $100,000. And then finally, for monies collected for the special license plates related to Child Victims Trust Fund, the Transportation Cabinet will calculate the cost of actually producing that license plate, and then any excess money will be transferred over to the trust fund. This had been routinely accomplished through budgetary language in the past, and now it's actually codified in statute. Here are some administrative requirements. Prior legislation directing a tax amnesty program was not, that program was not completed by the Department of Revenue, and House Bill 8 provides another period of time for tax amnesty to occur. All administrative writings are required to be published on the DOR website within 120 days of issuance of that administrative writing, and certain forms are required to be published with 45 days prior to the taxpayer needing to file that form. So forms and administrative writings are now required to be placed out there on the website. Beginning October 1 of 24, the Department of Revenue is required to submit an annual report to this committee regarding actions taken to implement the tax law changes enacted by General Assembly, so that we can see what they're actually doing based on what has been enacted. And beginning September 1, 2024, the Office of State Budget Director is required to report to this committee as well. And two recommendations. The first is tax expenditures that could be immediately sunset, and a recommendation for tax expenditures that could be sunset within a 5-year period. This is just a little information about restricted and earmarked funds. The petroleum storage tank and the new tire fee for the disposal of waste tires, those two programs were extended. Parimutuel funds related to the tax that is on tracks, horse racing. That tax, that certain funds are earmarked for the horse industry and breeder incentives, and there is no change to the tax, and so general fund dollars will remain the same. However, the distribution of those earmarked monies will change just slightly. Additional money was provided for aftercare facilities. There is a Kentucky Equine Management internship program. The Bluegrass Community and Technical College is included in the distribution of some of those funds. There is an earmark for an international harness racing event to be held in Kentucky, and the Kentucky Problem Gambling Assistance Account will also receive some of that money. The $5 fee for a personal identification card is eliminated if there is no fixed address for the individual. And the Executive Branch Ethics Commission is allowed to increase fees to provide for a new online filing system. For local tax purposes, there was a redefinition of gross receipts for the local tax on car rental and ride sharing, the license fee there. These definitions were tweaked to ensure compliance at the local level. And I said there was not a very big impact at the start, so if you look at House Bill 8 and House Bill 122, you can see that, like I said, there was not a large impact at all. General fund increase was primarily related to the delay in the deferred tax deduction for corporation income tax, and that small road fund impact, negative impact, was primarily resulting from the elimination of the EV ownership fee on hybrid vehicles. So, be happy to answer questions.
Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Hayes, for your presentation. Our presentations, we always enjoy your resource and your knowledge, and get us a good understanding of what's going on. Can you comment on the tax amnesty, to see if there's been any outreach from the revenue, or have we reached out to them to find out if there's any progress whatsoever?
I have not made any contact.
They haven't contacted you?
And they have not contacted me, no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to take an opportunity on something that was mentioned that was in House Bill 8, and that was the extension of the payroll tax exemption for those emergency personnel that are coming in the event that we do have a disaster. I saw firsthand what that was helping with just last week in Christian County with the storms that came through. Saw it firsthand personally as my electric was off at our house in Pembroke for 5 days. and those employees who were working from out of state. I'm not sure the exact number, but at least 2/3 of all the employees that were out on that day, on those days, helping to do that repair, were workers coming from out of state to help our local electric cooperative. And I do want to say thank you to the chairman and the committee for making sure that we've got that extension in place. It is so beneficial whenever these individuals come to help us. It makes their life a little easier at the end of the year, and they do not have to file a Kentucky state income tax on income earned here when they volunteered to come and work in our state during these disasters. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good, thank you. See no other questions or comments. I do want to say this, this can be dry stuff, it can be boring stuff. I find it rather exciting. But I will say this, understand that this is about as high level as it happens. The amount of detail that budget staff goes through and the amount of detail that revenue staff goes through is phenomenal. This is at the highest of highest levels. I would caution anyone to seize on any particular slide and go, aha, this explains everything. It would be kind of like taking the Bible and going, aha, it said in the beginning, I know the rest of it. So you've got to dig into it, and I appreciate the detail effort that budget and revenue go to. Without y'all, we could not get this stuff done even by a small degree, and I appreciate it.
We'll be glad to take that deep dive whenever you're ready, though.
Very good, and we will continue to do so. Thank you. Anything else you have on for today?
I don't.
All right, well, thank you very much again. And then up next, we have USA Cares Appropriation. We should have Deputy Commissioner and Executive Director. At least that's what we had scheduled. And then I know we've had at least one sign up on the issue. And I don't think I've had the opportunity to speak with you on this issue, so I want to make sure I'm fair about that. If you will, just introduce yourself for the record.
I'm Juan Renaud, Deputy Commissioner, KDVA.
Thank you.
We previously had Dr. Session, but we had some competing events. I needed him to go ahead and catch that up for us.
It's all good. And normally I swear people under oath. We haven't done it today with the non-partisan staff, and I don't think we're going to do it at this moment because that's the way this committee has been run today. Okay. Now, with that said, why we even have this issue on is simply this. I believe on the final version of House Bill 6, veto override in part, page 6, lines 12 through 18 reads something like this. USA Cares, included in the above general fund appropriation is $1 million in each fiscal year for USA Cares. No more than 10% in each fiscal year may be retained for administrative purposes. Veterans Affairs shall submit a semi-annual progress report to the IJC on appropriations and revenue detailing the use of the funds by a certain date beginning on February 1 of 25. Notwithstanding another statute, any portion of general fund not expended for this purpose shall lapse back to the budget reserve trust fund account on timing. What's been brought of concern to me is that the appropriation that's been set up as $1 million in each fiscal year may not be addressed exactly that way. It may be set up as a reimbursement model. It may be set up as other models. And this is an ongoing conversation that would be between USA Cares and KDVA, and I understand that. I just want to make sure that we're clear that the General Assembly has shown its ability, even in this year's legislation, to say if it's a reimbursement model, then we say so, much like we did with in K-12 funding. When we deal with SROs, that was set up as a reimbursement model. You expend it, we reimburse you on a grant program. This was not set up that way, and I just want to make sure that you can, if you want to speak to it, great. If you can go, we're still in the ongoing conversations, great. Again, I haven't had the opportunity to talk with you on this, so I don't want to hit you blindside, but I'm just trying to put context about why the issue is even here. proceed.
Understood all. We're actually still in the MOU process, the negotiation piece. We're pretty much in the final stages of that. So that was MOU had been returned to USA Cares for their review.
Yeah, good, thank you. Anything else? Update of any sort? It's your call, not mine. I'm just asking.
Still in the negotiation, sir.
Very good. I did have one person sign up on the issue, Matt Castor, USA Cares. If you want to speak, you're welcome to. Come up, introduce yourself for the record. If it's nothing further to proceed with, it's your choice also. But if you will, make sure you introduce yourself for the record. Make sure the green light's on so the record can pick you up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. USA Cares was honored to receive this appropriation in House Bill 6. This is a life-changing thing for many of the veterans that we serve, and we are very excited about the impact it's going to have here in Kentucky for the next 2 years. The process of receiving these funds has been one that we didn't anticipate would be cumbersome, but it has been cumbersome, to say the least. It has been a series of negotiations of the MOU that was mentioned earlier, MOA that was mentioned earlier. We have gone back and forth 5 different times on 5 different versions of this MOA. It has been called a grant. It has been called a reimbursement program. It has been listed in numerous ways. It has included a desire to have monthly reporting completed by USA Cares, which is above and beyond what is listed in House Bill 6 greatly, and puts a tremendous strain on our staff to do so. We were contacted in April to have a meeting to discuss how these funds would be used. It was stated in the beginning of that meeting that the full amount would not be paid to USA Cares, but it would be held and paid as needed. As you can imagine, as an emergency veteran services nonprofit, if you don't have the funds ready to go, you can't respond in an emergency.
What kind of emergency services are you talking about? Help me with that.
Sure. So we get about 150 to 200 calls a week. Typically, these are housing cases. These are people who are on the verge of eviction or foreclosure. Usually they are within 48 to 72 hours of losing their home. These costs to stop an eviction can range, they average right now about $4,000. This appropriation will actually allow us to lift our limits to be able to help some additional cases that have a little higher dollar load. So many of the cases are housing. We also stop vehicle repossession. We step in with food cards, and we help find jobs.
Thank you, sorry.
Thank you. The 10%, as you mentioned, there's 10% set aside for administrative. We had asked for that to be able to hire additional staff to meet what we anticipate will be an increased workload with this appropriation. It was brought up in the initial meeting on May 10th at KDVA's headquarters that a portion of this funding should go towards the governor's challenge. That was not, I have met with many of you on this appropriation. That was never brought up. I never mentioned that we would do that, and I have no intention of doing that. But it was stated quite clearly that a portion, and the number given was $18,000, should go towards the governor's challenge. I'm here today because I'm asking for clarity from this committee. I'm asking for clarity as to what does the bill say? What does the appropriation say? It is our understanding that this is a lump sum of $1 million with reporting semi-annually. It doesn't state anything else in it. So as you can imagine, we were caught off guard by all the additional stipulations in this agreement. We are in the negotiation process. However, the latest version of the agreement is still a stretch, to say the least. We don't have any intention of signing this. I don't know where that leaves us. I don't know how we're going to receive these fundings. As a smaller to medium-sized nonprofit, that puts us in a tremendous bind. And I'm here today to ask for help. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And as far as giving advice, what I stated up front about how I read bills and what the understanding is of the General Assembly dealing with other issues, I stand by that. That's about as far as this committee could even attempt to put a reference point on it. However, I have a question from Representative Johnson, I believe, or a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for USA Cares, this is the first budget cycle you've received an appropriation like this. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, Commissioner, there's a second program that I know of called the Valor Program that is a very similar process. Are you familiar with the Valor Program?
Yes, I am.
Are you in the same types of negotiations with the administrators of the Valor Program as you are with USA Cares?
Yes, we had.
Have you completed that process?
And that is near completion as well.
So I think there's a question in here, but I'm going to make a comment. While this is the first cycle for USA Cares to receive this kind of funding, for the Valor Program, it's actually the second budget cycle that they've received funding. In the first cycle, we did not have these issues. We did not have negotiations. We did not need to have negotiations. The people who are running the Valor Program ran the program with the money they were given as allocated by the General Assembly, reported back to the General Assembly, and it worked. I do not even understand why there are these negotiations going on. My question, I think my question is, what thought process has led your agency to think that you need to be taking any funding or going into any agreements with these agencies that we already know how they work?
Well, with the USA Cares, we're doing it under House Bill 6, and the other one was listed as a grant, and this one was not. So we did that part as it had been previously done, and just making sure we're doing being fiscally responsible with taxpayer money. We're making sure we're doing everything by financial or fiscal regulations and procurement regulations as well. We're just trying to make sure we're doing everything properly and in line with everything, all guidelines.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll simply provide this guidance from me as someone who's been involved with both of these programs for some time now. You don't need to do a lot. Let them do their jobs. These MOAs ought to be very simple if necessary at all, and I'm not convinced they're necessary at all. We know what money we appropriated to these agencies. We know how they're using them. We don't need a whole lot of reporting. We don't need a whole lot of micromanagement in their business. They've got their responsibilities. They know how much money they're supposed to have. I would simply suggest to you let them do their jobs and get out of their way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else? Senator Deneen?
My understanding is that you are negotiating in an effort to use the interest gained off of this funding for the governor's program. Is that what I'm understanding?
That is not correct.
That is not correct.
That is not
So
correct.
What is the purpose then of withholding the funding from this agency? You said to be more fiscally responsible. Has USA Cares had issues with being fiscally responsible?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. What I did say was the funds will be available to them as they need it. We're not trying to hold anything back or limit them or hamstring them from doing anything, Senator.
The money that's appropriated directly to them from the General Assembly, would that money not be theirs to grow that interest off and use that interest in USA Cares as they see fit? Why is the KDVA attempting to hold that money to fund a governor's program off the interest gained?
Again, Senator, we're not attempting to hold any funds to fund the governor's program. That is not a true statement. That was a discussion only.
Is that in the negotiations ongoing right now?
That is not.
All funds then would be directed towards USA Cares.
I confirm.
let me make sure that we're clear about this. This issue has been raised, Valor, USA Cares, and some other things that have popped up. We were able to get this in at pretty late timing, and I do appreciate you showing up on late timing and us not having spoken. But I want to make sure that we understand. I know what that appropriation says. I know how that appropriation language fits with other things that we do and things that we do that are differently situated by language. From a little bit of attorney background, I am full well capable of sending out a 300-page description on an appropriation, just like a good contract. There's give and take between the executive and the General Assembly. There's give and take between USA Cares and KDVA. But if I don't see good common sense, I don't see good give and take on one or more issues, I'm happy to churn the words out and make sure we know how many quarter squares of toilet paper we can use. So I trust everybody to be able to say, let's get a reasonable negotiation and let's try to accomplish what the purposes are. I see nothing that's odd about USA Cares' mission. I know of nothing. I also know of no bad rating that they have, which would spike suspicion about how we deal with them. And it's interesting that it's not maybe just one appropriation, but others that we may have similar friction on. I'm just hoping that the friction smooths out, and then we'll be watching it. I know other committees are interested in this also. You may have another invitation in July from another committee and another one in August until we know that everything's smoothed out. And I do appreciate you coming on late notice again. All right, anything else from anybody? All right, last thing on the, thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Last thing on the agenda, and this is not last, oh yeah. Last on the agenda, I would point out number 6 and number 7. Correspondence for review. You may want to look at those things. We do. I suggest you try to look at those. Reports for review. I would try to look at those reports. If you go, where are my reports? I can guarantee that staff on A&R can give you multiple copies just like that. Any of these correspondence or the reports, look those over. Co-Chairman McDaniel, anything else for today? Great meeting. Thank y'all very much. Thank everybody that presented. And then Chairman McDaniel will have it next month, as stated, on the 17th of July at 1 o'clock. Grins and giggles when we come back. Thank y'all.